Did the recording from the last session work on your computer, Ally?
Yep.
Okay, because I got a pop-up that was like recording failed and I went,
No, it works on my end.
okay,
Okay. I'm gonna
Very-
start now.
okay.
And you guys, my sound is okay, my volume and everything.
Yeah, you're great.
This is the first time I'm using my AirPods or whatever they're called.
They seem good for me.
Okay, good.
Good evening. As folks are coming in, just a note to say we're going to give it a few minutes for attendees to join, and we'll kick it off in probably about 5 past. I'll chime in and give this message a few times between now and then, but welcome, and we will look forward to kicking off the session in about 4 or 5 minutes, just giving folks time to get into the webinar. Good evening again. As folks are coming in, just a note to say we're going to give it about 2 more minutes to let attendees join before we kick off with tonight's presentation and content. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to tonight's discussion, and we'll be back with you in just about 2 minutes. Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to start our introductions and some housekeeping and a few things while we just let a few more folks join. But thank you for coming tonight. We're excited to have our third in the free professional development workshop series for artists. This is under the PAiD program, which is a Los Angeles County Arts and Culture program. PAiD is a number of things, but one of them is this free resources, this free professional development workshops. And we are excited to be joined tonight with some guests that I'll introduce in a moment as we join our third session. So tonight I am Emily Womack, Dyson Womack. I am doing these opening remarks now. These are your welcoming remarks. To note, we are recording these sessions so that they can be posted live, and they will be posted live, or not live, I'm sorry. The recordings will be posted on the PAiD website at the County Arts and Culture site. So they will be accessible for future use. Introduction tonight to the PAiD program will be by my colleague Allie M. She'll be sharing a little bit more information about the PAiD program and the different elements of it beyond this workshop series. We will preview some of the upcoming workshops to make sure you're aware of what other topics we'll be addressing. And then we'll jump into tonight's topic, understanding public art contracts, i.e. contracts in general. We're happy to have our co-presenter tonight, Virginia Broersma, here with the artist contract, also an artist herself. I will do a further introduction of her a little bit later. And then as always with these workshops, we'll leave a really significant amount of time, maybe even an hour for your questions. We really want to hear what questions you have so that we can address and answer them as best as we can, and to start to build that dialogue and that conversation about public art in Southern California, and about the challenges that we face as artists and in this community and in this space. I do want to draw your attention to the last piece on this slide. So when you are submitting questions, you can do that at any point as you think of them during the presentation. Go ahead and submit them. That is through the Q&A button. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see Q&A as an option. If you select that, that is where you can type in your questions. And then we'll during the Q&A part, we'll go through them all until we've run out. I think that is it for my housekeeping comments. Again, welcome. We're really pleased to have folks in attendance for this third session. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Allie M., to speak a little bit about the PAiD program in all of its elements. Allie? Oh, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Allie, and I'm a project manager at Dyson & Womack, and I'm very excited to be here with you tonight. A little about the program. So PAiD is a program of the LA County Department of Arts and Culture with funding by the Mellon Foundation. And it's a multi-year initiative that aims to advance the career growth and economic empowerment of underrepresented artists in LA County. One of the main goals of the program is to address the historical barriers that artists have faced when trying to enter public art, and also deal with the wider challenges artists encounter throughout their careers. So the program is made of multiple components, one being the professional development workshops. And this series of free workshops is designed to provide valuable skills and resources to artists of all backgrounds and all career stages who are just interested in public art. We have several workshops coming up through October 2nd. If you want to take a look at all of the workshops, you can visit the county's website, and we'll drop the link in the chat for you. And another component is the Artist Council. So we launched the first open call last year, and we'll be launching it again this coming fall. And the council is a group of 8 selected artists commissioned to engage in a series of policy discussions and make recommendations to the county. And they also get to create temporary public artworks. The public art apprenticeship is another opportunity for artists that's opening this fall. This opportunity is open to artists who have never completed a civic art or public art commission, And the selected artists are going to engage in training and mentorship to complete their first ever public art commission. And then finally, we have the PAiD website, as Emily mentioned. It is a website and like a resource bank for artists. And it's going to include all the recordings of the workshops that we host and other resources relative to the field. And the launch is still to be determined, but we will notify all attendees when they become online.
Thanks, Allie.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. I've got a very curious cat with me tonight, so sorry guys, she's making herself present this evening. Next, Allie, if you want to go ahead and just preview some of the upcoming workshops after tonight.
Yeah. So after this one, we have another workshop next Tuesday focusing on developing a project budget. And we have several more workshops coming up through October again, and I highly suggest visiting this link right here. And again, I'll drop it in the chat. But the next workshop is going to be with the artist Charles Dixon, and it's going to offer insights into budgeting for public artworks, covering fabrication, installation, artist fees, insurance, and more. And then we have a few more coming up, but I really wanted to highlight Thursday, August 21st, public art opportunities in LA County. This is a workshop that will gather all commission, like not all, but a lot of commissioning agencies across LA County, and they're going to directly be sharing with you upcoming artist opportunities and offer resources on how to find and apply to these. So we highly recommend you come to these. So in case you want to, start applying or want to apply for a new one.
Thanks, Allie. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
So tonight we are talking about understanding contracts. As we have publicly said, we're going to look at this session is going to look at how an overview of standard public art contract terms. We're going to look at some of the key elements, but we're also going to talk a lot about practical advice and real world examples to provide strategies for negotiation, resources, contractual knowledge that supports hopefully your work as artists in many endeavors, not just public art, but also in that field. As I mentioned earlier, we are joined tonight by a co-presenter, Virginia Broersma. Virginia is an LA-based painter, artist, whose work has been exhibited in many locations, galleries, alternative spaces all over the world, including major places in the US. She has received grants as well as private foundations, including the City of Chicago and the Mosaic Foundation. And she was also, in 2020, the co-founder of the Artist Contract. The Artist Contract seeks to advocate for better professional practices in the art world. And Broersma has worked with an attorney to create, gather, and share legal resources with artists, including free contract templates. So thank you for that. And also thank you for being willing to come and share about what you have learned through the process of starting and running the Artist Contract. I want to highlight that both myself and Virginia, who will be speaking tonight, are not lawyers. Our role here tonight is to really share our perspectives on what Virginia has seen as both an artist and an advocate in this space, and what I have seen as an arts public art professional and commissioner and support about how important contracts are, and how getting that right is really a huge part of the success of a project and the way that an artist might feel supported or unsupported. So our role here tonight is to speak from our experience, to share some insights, to hopefully share some resources, and to give you guys some further spaces that you can look into. But I do want to say very clearly at the top, we are not lawyers ourselves. We will seek to answer all of your questions and provide a lot of support, but our role here tonight is to really provide some context and some basic, really kind of fundamental information about the role of contracts, the purpose of contracts. Again, I'm Emily Womack, co-founder at Dyson and Womack and a public art consultant. I have worked in this field for quite some time with a lot of different hats, from being an artist many, many years ago to working with agencies to commission artists and support artists. And it is an honor to be here tonight to be able to speak about this really important topic with Virginia and for each of you in attendance. With that being said, I am going to now hand over the mic to Virginia to hear all of the information that you want to share with us tonight. Again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Emily. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Emily. Thank you to everyone who is attending tonight. I just wanted to reiterate the presentation I'm going to give and everything I talk about is coming from my place as an artist. I am not an attorney. I have gained a lot of experience and information over the years by working with attorneys. And also, this project really developed, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but developed from a sense of feeling disempowered in the art world and trying to remedy that for myself and for other artists. So my presentation will be kind of broad strokes about advocacy as an artist, using contracts, and I will be speaking about it mostly in terms of working as an exhibiting artist, selling your work, exhibiting your own artwork, not specifically about public art contracts, but a lot of the information will apply to that as well. And we will get into more specifics. I know Emily has more information about tips and information about public art contracts specifically. All right, so let's get started. Can you go to the next slide? All right. So when I was 15, I told my parents that I was going to become an artist. I was going to go to art school. I am so lucky that they always supported me, and they never once suggested that I should consider something that would be more secure or stable, like getting a medical degree or a law degree. But they did make it clear to me that I had to figure out how to financially support myself once I became an adult and was living on my own. I went on to receive a bachelor's degree in painting at the Savannah College of Art and Design, and I have never steered away from my ambition to have a career as an artist. I expected it would be hard, and I was told it would be hard. But only now, after pursuing my profession for close to 20 years, can I see clearly how in many ways I was ill-prepared to survive as an artist upon graduation. I left school with the understanding that if my work was good enough, the rest would fall into place. The reality of the flaw in this thinking has sunk in over the years as I have tried to find a path forward for myself that relies on just making work in the studio, which was the primary focus of my education. And so far, like many of my peers, I have had many other jobs because I have not been able to support myself just by being an artist. My day jobs have been in a lot of different industries like music, education, investment banking, property management, architecture. And most of the small businesses and nonprofits that I've worked for, they all seem to have a basic understanding of how to run a business and operate as a professional, regardless of their industry or area of expertise. So it isn't that it's impossible to make a living as an artist, it's that art students are, generally speaking, only taught about how to make their art. They're taught nothing or very little about how to run a business, sell their work, write a budget, market their work, or draft a contract. The rest of the art world, such as galleries, museums, collectors, institutions, they have all benefited from this lack of knowledge, even if it's unintentional. There's this romantic notion of a pure artist that is only concerned with making their work in the studio and that can't be bothered with things like contracts and invoices. And this has placed artists in an unfortunate position that perseveres even now into 2023, 2024, sorry, I'm a year off, when we should know better. Next slide, please. So other creative industries, such as music, publishing, film, and television, they have formed groups such as unions and guilds to advocate for their own productions. These groups have created remedies for the financial losses that actors, writers, and musicians have previously faced by establishing a way to, for example, claim royalties for their work by including it in their contracts and making it a standard practice. So you might think of a musician who gets a royalty each time their song plays on Pandora or Spotify, and how actors get royalties when their show gets syndicated. Next slide, please. So visual arts in America have tried to also form unions throughout the years. And there are a lot of reasons why they don't tend to last long. Here are a few reasons. I've been researching this recently, and some recurring things come up. So first of all, visual artists don't have a common employer. It's very hard to know who they're holding accountable for wages or other equity issues. Another issue is that artists just have too many different priorities and ideas about how to address problems. So, for example, in the 1970s, artists wanted to protest the Vietnam War. They wanted to do so by making political artwork, but they couldn't agree what type of work that was. Was it conceptual work? Was it minimalist artwork? Was it anti-commercial work? Was it work that they could sell where the money would be used towards their efforts? Or was it not making any artwork at all as an act of withdrawal? They could not agree. So they had a very hard time banding together to make any kind of progression towards their goals. Another example was that at around the same time, some artists wanted government funding for the arts. Like you may know about the Works Progress Administration, which was the result of a successful union in the 1930s and put artists to work. But in the 1970s, some people didn't want to take any government money because of the affiliation with Vietnam, and just no one could agree. It's very hard to get organized, to collectively organize, and to agree on a common agenda. So these types of disagreements often tore apart alliances and prevented forward movement for change. Next slide. That artists union in the 1930s that I mentioned did have some major successes. A group of about 25 artists in New York started the union during the Great Depression, and then it grew, and there were around 300 artists who attended a symposium on unemployment, and they were one of their demands was for state-funded relief work for artists. And this union was influential in the establishment of the Public Works of Art Project and the Federal Art Project, or in the Works Progress Administration. These were all programs during and after the Depression. So it is connected to what was going on in the world at the time. And after the government stopped funding these programs, the union stopped having success. And again, they disagreed about what they should be working on, and eventually they fell apart. Next slide, please. So I put this slide up, flashing forward to more recent history, and just to point out that over the past century, there has been such an incredible influx of artists pursuing art as a professional career. And the US has not matched this growth in terms of funding, developing patrons, developing opportunities for sustainable livelihoods as working artists. So here's some numbers from 10 years ago. I'm sure many of us are also familiar with how much art school art programs cost and the major debt situation that a lot of artists leave school with while not having any real job prospects. And despite the wealth of America compared to other countries around the world, we have disproportionately low funding and government support for the artists. Other countries have paid opportunities, and some places even cover living expenses and studios for the artists, but we don't have this in the US. So this situation has created a reliance on the gallery model, where the gallery operates on the artist's behalf as the seller of the work. Artists have relied on this model as the primary solution for earning income from artwork. And while it's slowly changing, the validation a gallery provides is still prioritized over selling your own work. Next slide. This puts the artist in a disempowered position, often feeling like they need to do anything to stay under the protective wings of the gallery for their best chance at income, career growth, and stability. This puts them in a position of trust and precarity that varies from relationship to relationship, but more often than not, doesn't involve written agreements among the people involved in transactions. This would be strange and against professional standards in many other industries, but is widely accepted in the art world. The majority of artists I know do not ask for a contract when they sell their work, consign it, or exhibit. I still consider myself an emerging artist, and up until recently, I didn't even think about using contracts. I didn't think I was successful enough for contracts to matter. Contracts seemed over my head, intimidating, and they also seem like an unnecessary hassle. I've been told by a lot of artists that they feel as if they're asking for too much if they want their agreements in writing, and then they fear losing out on sales, relationships, or opportunities. They are afraid of being seen as difficult. Next slide. Artists commonly feel like they are not in a position to negotiate and don't have any leverage, feeling like they have to take what they can get. There are so many artists and limited opportunities, which creates a feeling of scarcity and desperation. Artists are afraid of being told we ask for too much, are being untrusting and disrespectful, and are making it more difficult for everyone else. This quote is from decades ago, but I have heard similar sentiments reported back to me recently that, oh, you'll trust, you should just trust me. I'm not gonna have a contract. But all of this does not feel great to me. Next slide. Artists often feel like they don't have power, but the art world cannot run without artists. So artists do have power. Artists can shape the art world by asking for change. Artists can increase their stability, put protections in place for themselves and their work, and work to achieve fairness by asking for contracts in a variety of professional exchanges. So, selling your work, loan agreements when you are sending your work off to be in a show, consignment agreements if a gallery is going to hang on to your work for a period of time and try to sell it. With these public art relationships, all of these are opportunities for you to have agency in how you want to shape the art world. Next slide. Can you go to the next slide, please? All right. So having a contract simply means putting down what you and another person or entity have agreed to, and you're putting it down in writing. If you both come to an agreement, there shouldn't be any problem with having a contract. If there is, it's a red flag. Artists shouldn't feel like asking for a contract is a big ask. This view, I believe, grows from a position of feeling disempowered on the artist's end. I know that there have been a lot of situations that I personally have asked for a contract or asked for certain terms, and I've gotten pushback, and I've felt like I didn't have any power, and so I agreed to their terms or didn't have a contract, and that, you know, it created a bad situation. So that feeling of feeling disempowered, I just want to say that I have also felt that, and it's a feeling that I know a lot of artists share. But asking for a contract can reflect really positively on your own level of professionalism. It can make you look good by showing you've got all your ducks in a row. If somebody is resistant to paperwork, or just thinks, oh, I've always done it this way, you should trust me, those aren't good justifications for skipping a contract and having a handshake deal. In fact, artists should see contracts and negotiation as a tool for building positive relationships, for all of your business relationships, but especially with the owners of your work, using a sales agreement, with your gallery partners, with institutional partners, who they should be invested in wanting to protect your artwork, having a good relationship with you, and protecting the artwork's legacy and its value over time. So with considering all of those things, you might ask yourself, are you willing to walk away from something if a person or a organization won't agree to the terms of your contract? What terms are negotiable for you and what terms are not? Next slide. All right, I wanted to bring up this example because this is an example, from that actually happened in the art world, of an artist who initiated change. So Robert Rauschenberg made this painting called Thaw in the upper left, and some collectors, Robert and Ethel Skoll, bought it for $900 in 1958. Then it went to auction in 1973. It went to the Sotheby's auction and went to the secondary market. Somebody bought it, and so they resold the artwork, and it was resold for $85,000. Rauschenberg didn't receive any part of the increased value of his work and was pretty upset about it. And so I don't know, you can't really tell in the photograph, but this is a famous photograph where he's approaching Mr. Skoll, and they're having words about this situation. So then he decided, he advocated for changes in the law, and those it actually resulted in the California Resale Royalty Act of 1976. Now, I know that I'm talking a lot about, or mentioning, resale royalties a lot, and I am doing so because it's a great example of something that is not traditionally part of the understanding of treating artists fairly, but it is becoming more part of the landscape. Artists have advocated for resale royalties for a long time. It's, as I'll mention, it went into legislation, and there became a law about it in California for a while. But it's a good example of an issue that artists have been advocating for and have been able to make changes. So, okay, so let's go to the next slide. I'm not going to talk about it very much, but the the California Resale Royalty Act was influenced by Rauschenberg, and it went into effect in 1977. But in 2018, it was nullified. And basically, there were class action lawsuits about, states and interstate commerce. And basically, the court said this Resale Royalty Act doesn't work, and it was nullified. So for a while, if an artist's work sold to a collector and then that collector resold it, if there was a profit, they would have to give 5% of the profits to the artist. But we don't have that anymore. So the only way to enforce a resale royalty is to put it in a contract. Next slide, please. So are contracts really necessary? This is kind of more of a prompt for me and us to start thinking about whether or not this is something that contracts are a tool that we want to adopt using, and that we should waste our time on it. And thinking about it in terms of the context of public art, I know that many artists feel intimidated and overwhelmed by the complexity of contracts when it comes to working with a city or a state or a government agency, or even a big business on a public arts commission. And I just want to mention that starting to adopt the practice of asking for contracts and using very more simple contracts in things like when you sell a work out of your studio, or when you exhibit with a gallery or a museum, and start practicing with those smaller contracts helps you to become more comfortable and more familiar, so that when contracts start to get more complex, you already have experience negotiating and, first of all, asking for a contract. Because I know that's a big hurdle that a lot of artists face, is that feeling of, I can't even ask for a contract. But again, asking for contracts and using contracts are a way to reinforce professionalization in your fields, generating the standards of the art world that you want to see by asking for them. They protect you and your work, and they also build better relationships between your partners, your business relationships. Next slide, please. And I know that this is also a sticking point for many artists, is feeling like you can't negotiate. But yes, you can negotiate. With most contracts, until they're signed, they're an opportunity for conversation and to come to agreement about terms that are beneficial for both parties. So when you're presented with a contract, or even if you are presenting somebody else with a contract, remember that everything is negotiable. What are your wants and your needs? Things you could be flexible on. What are non-negotiables that you would be okay with walking away from an opportunity if you didn't get those negotiables, if you didn't get those non-negotiables included. And again, this is an opportunity for you to build professional business relationships. It doesn't mean you're going to get everything you want, but practicing negotiation is just a great exercise in learning what is important to you as an artist. And I kind of alluded to this, but I've had experiences where I was pressured into accepting terms that I didn't think I didn't like, but I decided I would deal with them, and then realized after the fact that I should not have done that. And so going forward, I would never do that again. Some of this is just by learning from experience, but these using contracts can be really a tool for a lot of benefits as a professional artist. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, I'm going to keep going. Emily, I don't know if you can go to the next slide, but so my next slide, what I'm looking at is a question that says, why are contracts important now? So is everyone here still? My view just changed, so I wanted to make sure that we're all good.
I'm sorry. I think my internet is unstable and it kicked me off. So give me 1 second and I'll have you back running.
We've all dealt with those tech issues.
Oh, they're awful. All right, here you go.
Okay. All right. So, why are contracts important now? Okay, so the art world is changing. Even since I started this project in 2020, 2021, the landscape is very different. A lot has happened since then, and there are a lot of shifts happening where artists are becoming more empowered. It used to be that an artist really needed a gallery to survive, but that doesn't really apply anymore. Artists sell their work directly to collectors all the time, using the internet, using social media. It used to be that the galleries would control artists' relationships with their collectors, but now artists are demanding greater transparencies in their sales transactions. This is one of the things in the sales contract that I started as the very first project with the artist contract was a sales contract, and we advocated for resale royalties. There are also terms in it to be notified of who is buying your work, because we heard from a lot of artists that was really important to them. And the control of galleries not telling who owns their work is an example of keeping artists in a disempowered position. But artists are calling for more transparency. They're calling for change. And by regularly asking for these things, it's becoming more of a standardized practice. Again, resale royalties, it used to be, sometimes artists couldn't have any influence over where their work was shown, but artists can veto their work being in an exhibition or use social media if their work is being placed in a situation where they're unhappy with it. Artists are gaining control over their work in ways that it's happening. I don't know. I think it's happening pretty fast compared to previous decades. Next slide, please. All right, so I put this here. So our country's legal system was built, its first responsibility was to defend property rights. The laws that it was built on were written by free white men with titles and property to protect. And this legacy is still impacting us today in many ways, including how our country prioritizes property owner rights above all others. But a while back, I attended a talk by the curator, Destiny Ross Sutton, and something she said really stuck with me. She talked about specifically when you're selling work and if you're buying work, that you have to take the conversation beyond just a transfer of goods, that we are all stewards of culture. And I just love reminding myself and reminding other artists of that, because it can be really hard to not feel like you are a manufacturer of goods, and as an artist your identity doesn't matter. And we're all, I think, artists because we want there to be more of a conversation around our role and our work, being stewards of culture. We're not just manufacturers of goods, so keeping that in mind. Next slide. All right, so what resources do we need and what resources do we have? I know I've gone over kind of a lot of stuff, and just in keeping this in our time allotted in mind, I wanted to plant the seed of a question in your brains of thinking about what resources do you as an artist need to protect yourself and your work, and what resources do we have? And the artist contract project that I co-founded with an attorney, I do not have any legal education or legal background. My experience is limited, but I know that I could partner with other people who have more experience, and I could take my desire to advocate for other artists and put it to use and become a voice for other artists who either feel disempowered or are afraid to speak up for some of these issues that I'm talking about. So I mention this because we artists are problem solvers, and looking around at what resources we have available to us, we can often find the resources that we need. And I'll just mention one more example. Next slide, please. So within the past year, kind of tangential project that's with the artist contract, an artist came to me who lived in Riverside and asked if I knew of anybody in LA who had a studio that could lend it to him for, a day to come into town, because Riverside is, an hour to like 5 hours away from LA, depending on traffic. Just wanted to come into LA, do studio visits, line him up with the galleries, curators. So he's close to LA, but doesn't have a studio here. And at the time, I didn't know anybody to recommend. So I put my problem solving hat on and came up with this idea to facilitate connections between artists in LA who have a studio, but maybe they're going out of town on a residency or are never there on weekends, who could lend it out to people who just need a studio for a day to come into town to do studio visits, or artists who don't have a studio and just need or doing a project where they just need it for a couple of weeks. And the artist contracts, we worked with an attorney, came up with a licensing agreement that artists can use to protect themselves if they enter into an arrangement. All this to say, there was a need. I saw it, and I came up with an idea and partnered with people that could fill in the gaps of my experience and my knowledge. And together we created this project. So there are a lot of things that artists can do. And that was one of the things that Emily and I spoke about, just the agency that artists have in shaping the art world to be a place where artists are valued, protected, respected, where their work is protected, and create a more sustainable and stable livelihood for all of us. All right, I know this is kind of my goal end time. Could you go to the next slide? And it just has the artist contract website and Instagram, so you can follow along and join a mailing list if you want to stay in touch. But it's here, and maybe we can put it in the chat. But I'm sticking around for the rest of this, so we'll talk more in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Virginia. And again, sorry that I dropped out. I still do have every once in a while a warning sign popping up that my connection is unstable. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. But I really appreciate you providing us some context about the history of artist negotiations in our country, the present of that, some of the changes you're seeing, and the ways that you have found as an artist to build spaces for advocacy, build spaces for resources, and for being open to sharing those resources with others. It's so great to have met you in this process and to learn about all of the things that you guys are working on. I'm going to take us on a turn a little bit towards the public art sector. So many of the things that Virginia was just speaking about are super common across the arts, except for one, and that one being contracts and the existence of them. In the public art world, we love contracts. We use them all the time. And a big part of that is because the agencies that are commissioning artists are larger, they are often governmental, they are more well regulated, but that does not mean that they have always been equitable, supportive, or responsive to artists' needs. I love when I'm talking about contracts to use the image that I put on this slide. This is an artist, Simon Starling, whose work was, in this instance, was a boat that he took out on Loch Lomond in Glasgow, outside of Glasgow. And the process was to feed the steam engine with the wood that was the boat So eventually the boat just sank to, or it was all that was left was the steam engine itself, and it sank to the bottom. And it's funny and it's humorous, and I don't mean to paint such a dire perspective of contracts, but it can feel that way. It can really feel like you are feeding this fire that you can't get on top of. And it can feel demoralizing, and I think it's fun to have a little humor in that space as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit, in addition to what Virginia said, about some of the fundamentals of public art contracts, things that you may or may not see. I'm going to add, I feel like it is very fitting in all of the presentations that we have done so far, that we're giving the most kind of caveats around the one about contracts. And I think that speaks a lot to the hesitancy, the nervousness. So again, I'm going to say, not a lawyer here, but I've seen a lot of public art contracts. And my goal, I'm also not speaking as someone that represents, that works for or is the LA County. And I'm not speaking directly about their contract either. I'm talking in much more generalizations that I hope can be useful in any context that you might find yourself. So the first thing I wanted to share was just some of the things that you might typically see in a contract for a public art commission. I just put up front insurance, because this always comes up. It's always a topic. And as Virginia was sharing about the history of contracts coming from a place of land use, I would say, and ownership and commodity and property, I would say a lot of our contracts today are really centered around risk and risk aversion. And so insurance is a big line item in risk and risk aversion. So fundamentals of a public art contract are going to be terms of insurance. I'm going to speak in subsequent slides about what you might expect there and things you can do to advocate for yourself in those spaces. I also wanted to highlight that on some larger projects, there's this other word that comes into play sometimes called bonds, performance bonds, etc. That is a thing that is very common in the construction world. It is not so much common in the art world. And I put it in here because I've seen it come across my desk a few times with folks, and it's really not something that is common for artists to provide, that I think most artists ever could provide, whereas insurance, they can. So that's something to note when you're looking at a contract. And I think also what Virginia shared earlier about knowing what you're willing to accept, knowing what you're entering into, and seeing how that sets a dynamic is, if things feel really onerous, that might be a clue about something. And bonds are one of those situations where it might not be a great opportunity if folks can't quite figure out, what levels of insurance are more traditional to the public art field. It's also good to look at the length of term. Some contracts require you to hold insurance for several years after a project is completed. That's important to note because you would have to renew those on an annual basis. And if you're fine with that, you just need to make sure you budget for it, that you budget for that annual premium renewal for the term of that insurance. Other common things that you will see in a public art contract is things around intellectual property, more commonly known as copyright and moral rights. Some standards, another little caveat I'm going to share is that the things that I'm talking about tonight tend to be the current conditions of what you see in America, generally. It is not necessarily maybe what we all hope the conditions will be, or that we would like to see things change towards. I think Virginia spoke a lot about how advocacy and work on that front can lead to change, but I'm talking about really the current space. So copyright, did not always easily go to the artists. There have been rules on a federal level with VARA, the Visual Artists' Rights Act, and CAPA in California, the California version of that have tried to kind of make it really clear that copyright should belong to artists. And I think we're I think that is very well, there might be some outliers still, but most commissioning agencies in the art world today would understand and appreciate and agree that artists should hold copyright. Moral rights, which is a subdivision to some degree of copyright and has to do with the ability for an artist to say, maybe in the future, take their name away from a piece if they didn't like, maybe how it was displayed in the future, those kinds of more they're more bespoke forms of rights for artists. There's still no kind of clear consensus, I would say, in the commissioning world about whether moral rights should be given to artists or kept. I think that's a really important dialogue. If you're interested and if you're really focused on intellectual property, that's a good space to kind of research more and learn a bit about. I also want to note that, now that artists do receive and retain copyright, in many cases, the commissioning agencies will ask for licenses for non-commercial use. That means that you're giving them permission to not sell, not commercially, like create a t-shirt or a hat and sell it with your work on it, but non-commercially in terms of putting it on Instagram or on their websites, have that right to share and promote the work that they commissioned you for. That's a pretty standard thing you might see. I also wanted to highlight definitions. That's a part of most contracts. It's usually the kicker off at the beginning. And it really kind of, I think it's really key to look at what definitions are given and take some time to read them. I think that can help you also understand how a commissioning agency is thinking about terms. So you should expect to see some definitions. If there aren't any, that's kind of a good clue too, that maybe there's some things that need to be defined. That's a point you could ask for clarification, and ask for definitions to be included. One of the things that I also have experienced a lot of is this idea of assumptions as it relates to contracts. And what we assume is not always what the other person assumes when they hear a word, or a set of words in tandem. And so I think it's really important to clarify with definitions in contracts what we mean by words. It is a language-based medium, I would say. You will also expect to see payment terms. That doesn't mean just how much. It also means when and how you're paid. Is it checks? Is it every 30 days? Is it every 90 days? A lot of agencies have different rules around that. So paying attention to what those payment terms are. A huge piece of a contract is the scope of work. What is it that you're delivering? What is the means by which the agency that commissioned you will accept the work? How do you get sign off? How do you get approval? What kind of deliverables, like engineering or prototypes or samples, might you have to provide in addition to the final finished piece? I would say the scope of work is probably one of your main areas of negotiation, as well as payment terms to some degree, but scope of works really should be should be worked out in tandem with whomever your commissioning agency is, to make sure that you can provide the deliverables you're being asked to provide and that they meet what you want to provide. It should also outline roles and responsibilities for each party in addition to scope of work. I'll go into what I mean by that on the next few slides. Again, terms of acceptance, ownership, and maintenance. A best practice public art contract will actually articulate the maintenance that the commissioning agency agrees to do, so that the piece that you are entrusting to their care will be maintained, will be cared for, and that there's some accountability there. It should also articulate the method of ownership, of how you hand ownership from you to that artist or to the commissioning agency. Sometimes we call that a transfer of title. There's lots of different ways of doing that, but it's that final point when a commissioning agency will accept your work and take it over into their care and their ownership. You will typically see termination terms. So, not just in termination. I think this is a great one to highlight something else on. Contracts inherently feel uncomfortable, attacking sometimes, as though you're doing something wrong, as though they're predicting a worst case scenario. And I think that's, again, goes back to that risk aversion where the lawyers and the legalese that is coming into play is focused on those worst case scenarios. And one of the things I really advocate for artists is when you're receiving a public art contract, when you're asking to review it, set up an in-person conversation if you can. So often the things that we think are really, set in stone, written in, concrete or whatever, that or in granite, that feel insurmountable. Once you meet face to face and you have those conversations, you can actually see where the windows of daylight between you are. And you can also kind of dispel some of that feeling that can come across when you're reading these documents that, they're projecting you're going to do things wrong. They're projecting that you're going to fail, that you're going to, renege on your contract or whatever it is, that that language can really come across in that way. Whereas when you meet one-on-one or or however it might be, it can help to kind of lower that and open the doors to conversation and negotiation. But termination terms are usually included, typically in the favor of the person producing the contract. So one of the things that I'm so appreciative about what Virginia is doing, and I hope that we can work to find perhaps a template for public art contracts in the work that you're doing as well, is because, the rule of thumb, the person writing the contract is going to write it in their favor first, right? And so I think it's super powerful for artists to have contracts that come from an artist's perspective, that they could hand an agency versus it always coming the other direction. So termination terms are one of those places where, like, the agency might have the right to terminate for convenience, but meaning not because anybody's done anything wrong, but just because the project's changed or the funding's changed, or for some reason out of everyone's control, they can't continue. But oftentimes the artists aren't given that same right to terminate for convenience. So I think those termination terms are a good place to look at. Whatever warranties you might be asked to provide, that's a good thing to look at. And then there's also always this big bloated bit of standard provisions that you're looking at, that are things like force majeure, which is, when if a hurricane comes down and blows over the piece in process and nobody can continue, or if, all of these things that are literally outside of both you and the agency's concerns. It usually includes things about indemnification. I'm going to say right now, I still don't understand indemnification. It's a space that I find very confusing. But also dispute resolution. So there's a lot of things, dispute resolution being like, are you going to go to arbitration? Are you going to, what county has jurisdiction, what city, what state, those types of things that you might see in a lot of contracts are those kind of standard provisions. In my experience, those standard provisions tend to be the things that have gone through the most legal and have the least ability to kind of change without a lot of negotiation. The other areas tend to be more negotiable. But I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So I also just wanted to speak a little bit about what artists should expect to provide an agency at the time when you might be contracted. And then on the next one, we'll look at the inverse of what agencies should provide. So when you get to the point of a contract, a lot of it is based off of budgets and schedules. And typically, the artist would be the first one to provide that. Sometimes, not always, sometimes there's a project plan with a schedule you need to meet to, but even under that, you would still be kind of providing some general idea of how you would move through stages of development, of design development, revisions, engineering, and the budget and the amount of funds that you need. One thing that comes up a lot with folks is like, paying for work before or after. That's an individual conversation that you could have with the commissioning agencies about what they can pay for in advance, what they can't, and where there might be room to front load certain things to make sure you have cash flow. This is a really important place to think about cash flow when you're putting your budget together, not just how much does it cost, but when would I need those funds? Right, not the moment you're negotiating, but as soon as a contract is finished, you should expect to provide that proof of insurance that we talked about, insurance. And if it is a multi-year, you would be needing to provide that each year to show that you've renewed. You should be expected to provide confirmation of who your team members are at that point. So if you are involving with fabricators or installers, in some instances that may come later down the road, but a lot of contracts want to know who your subs are, who you're going to be working with at the point of contracting. And then also, what is it that we're contracting? If you are being commissioned for something you've already proposed, then the proposal would be the basis of what it is. If you are being commissioned for something that you're going to design in the context of the contract, then it would be a plan of how you intend to design and how you intend to build that. Again, payment terms, frequency, amount, scope of work, all of those things are things that can and should be negotiated in public art contracts. But I also wanted to add, and any other terms you may want. There is no hard and fast rule that certain things are non-negotiable, even when an agency might say that's the case. You always have the right to ask, to request, to ask again, to look at. Commissioning agencies should also provide things. A contract is a joint partnership. It is two people agreeing to do things. It is not one person agreeing to do everything for someone else. A contract is typically made in the public art world between artists and the project owner. I highlight that because I have seen instances where artists have been commissioned to contractors or to art consultants like our firm. That can work. There's some differences there when that happens, but for the most case, you'll be contracted directly with the project owner. And that whoever you're contracting with should provide some of the following. If possible, they should provide an opportunity to see the site where the work is going. If it's not built, or even if it is, they should always provide drawings and details relevant to the work that you're commissioning. You should name, and they should provide you a knowledgeable point of contact central to the project team, not just for contract negotiation, but work going forward. Sorry, guys. The contract should confirm that copyright remains with the artist. I will say, I think if you are getting contracts that are taking your copyright, that's a pretty big flag. And I would not advocate anyone to go with contracts that do take artist copyright. The agency should clearly outline the work site requirements. And by that, I mean, if you are installing the work, they should let you know if there are things like contractor's licenses, if you need to pay prevailing wages. I know I'm using some terms that you may not be familiar with in this. If that is the case, please, you can drop those in the chat and we can or in the Q&A, and we can answer those in the Q&A too. And they should outline their responsibilities. That goes back to what I was saying about their maintenance, about the upkeep of the work, about their stewardship of the piece once they are the owners of it. In summary, and then we're going to go to your questions because I really want to make sure we have time to answer them. Many agencies can clearly explain what provisions in their contracts are most negotiable for them and which ones are harder to change. I think that's a really great place to start a conversation with, because it kind of signals a willingness to understand that there may be things that they have other legal obligations to with government agencies. They have other obligations to the taxpayers that are paying them, to the rules and laws of the state or city or county that they are in. And it can also help to save a lot of time by going, these are the things that, are above what we can change, and these are things that we can. Again, though, I think there's never a piece at this point that you can't ask about. They can always say, no, this is one we can't change. But I think it's a really nice way to open negotiations, is be like, where are the ones that are like maybe really hard or really out of your control? And what are the things that we really have a lot of room to negotiate on? I also really advocate that artists budget for legal support. There is no alternative, not even attending this session, to having actual legal support. And if you're receiving a commission that has budget that can support it, and I would say even if you feel like it can't support it, I really advocate that you find some line item and that you account for that in your first payment milestone. One of my hopes and goals for the development of this field is that we, just like we pay for proposals, is that we start to think about paying for artists to have legal advocates. I think that would be amazing. And I don't think that that's, a wild reach to ask for. But right now, in a landscape where that isn't the norm, that isn't the common, I really think it's a great idea to make that the norm for you. And if you can, not everyone can, but if you can front, or find a lawyer who's willing to wait till the negotiations are complete, until you receive that first payment to receive their payment, then you can think about how you might be able to find an advocate that can sit with you and be your support in those negotiations. Again, expect to be asked to provide insurance, but please feel like you can ask for recommendations and support in that. I think, that is sometimes something that feels really scary, that feels really daunting, that feels really impossible. Most of these agencies have commissioned other artists. They have resources, and if you just ask, they might be able to point you towards an insurance provider that they know other artists have worked with. And because I know that's a really daunting space that can be hard to find a foothold in. Again, underscore, always keep copyright, but be understanding that commissions may ask for that license for non-commercial use. Seek clarification on terms you don't understand and take time to fully read those contracts. Again, at the end, get legal support, and I put in parentheses and accounting whenever possible. I add that accounting because a contract is also about finances. And it is, before you sign a contract, it's a really, if you can, best practice. Yes, I know you're hungry. To run it by an accountant and say, is this going to change my tax bracket for a year? Is this going to affect how I need to withhold savings? Is this going to affect what taxes I owe? No one but an accountant could really support you with that information. That's their field, that's their expertise. And so I also like to recommend in a contract scenario to include legal and accounting support when and if possible. We're going to go into the Q&A now. I'm going to invite Virginia back to join me. And we'll see what comes up as we field your questions. We also have with us tonight Brianna McGilvray from the LA County Arts and Culture. And Allie M. from Dyson and Womack is going to help us by fielding the questions as they come in. And guys, we'll read them. If they're directed to one of us directly, we can take it that way. And otherwise, feel free to chime in as you see things that you have some support or some resources or some thoughts about. So Allie, if you want to start reading out the questions so that we can start addressing them.
Okay. The first question is to Virginia. Do your templates or recommendations include agreements with galleries when showing work and the gallery handles sales or takes a commission but does not represent you as an artist?
We have a consignment agreement that is not on the website yet, but it's in the works. I've been having conversations with artists this past year. We started the consignment agreement, and then all these conversations started happening with artists, and I realized that there are a lot of things that aren't common knowledge and not commonly included in a lot of consignment agreement templates. So we're trying to incorporate those things, and it will be available on the website. And with that consignment agreement, there is a possibility for you to include our fair contract, which is a sales agreement. So if they want to include the terms that you, and I should say with all of our templates, all of the terms are optional. I'm telling you about resale royalties, but if you use our sales agreement, you don't have to include a resale royalty if you've discussed it with your buyer or you decided that it's not important to you. So all of our templates are very adaptable and negotiable, but we include a lot of terms for artists, especially, to just become familiar with them and then decide if it's something that's important to them. So not yet on the consignment agreement, but we will have that soon.
Thank you. Next question. If a commissioning agency has their own contract, what are the most important negotiations to pursue in order to change their contract to benefit and protect the artist?
It's a great question. We've talked a lot about advocacy on a bigger level. On a one-on-one, when it's a contract, the most important thing is that you're comfortable with the terms that you're signing on to. And that's going to be unique and different to each artist and each situation. I tried to highlight a few spaces that I think are really no-goes, like taking copyright, asking for performance bonds, not giving equal relationships between and responsibilities, not having clear terms of acceptance of an artwork can be really cause messiness and difficulty. I think it's also really great. A lot of times people are focused on that part of just getting to the end of the contract, just getting the work done, getting it installed. But I do think it's also really important to think about the next part of a contract, which is its maintenance, its upkeep, and how it's protected over the lifespan, because that has a big impact on the rest of your career. If a piece gets really damaged and no one takes ownership of that, no one's being responsible to that, and your name is on it. So I also think it's good to pay attention to that latter part of what happens to the piece after the commissioning agency may own it. And then again, it just comes back to, like, if it's a level of requirements that you feel is too much risk for you, that's a personal thing that you might need to, because again, I think it's about mitigating and understanding risk. So how much risk you're willing and feel comfortable taking is that kind of personal piece. On a broader advocacy level, there are a lot of things that I think could be great, including having a template for an artist public art contract that comes from an artist perspective. But I think that is a bigger conversation and a lot of work. Whereas on the individual right now, I think there's a few things to look out for. And then it is also about understanding what your personal situation is.
Could I add something? I really liked, Emily, how you talked in your presentation about, like, putting it under the framework of these are the current conditions, and you also mentioned norms. And if you don't like the current conditions, a way to change that is by asking. That doesn't mean you're going to get what you ask for, but if I ask for it and the next artist asks for it and then 10 other artists ask for it, pretty soon it'll start to change the culture of whatever it is. So, if galleries are being asked by all of their artists to have contracts in place or to receive resale royalties or whatever the term is, that it's a slow change, but that can happen. So being, kind of deciding what you're okay with, maybe being flexible on right now, but you want to change, maybe I'll put up with this now because these are the circumstances that I'm dealt, but asking for what you want can plant the seed of future change.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think those are all really good points. And I think one thing just on some of the intimidation that can come around asking for different terms. I think one way for artists to think about it is that from an agency perspective, it actually shows that you're really prepared and that you're really thoughtful and that you're displaying a level of professionalism that the agency actually loves to see. So if we, are engaged with artists who ask really specific questions about the contract and say like, well, what about this term? And what about that? It really to us shows that you as an artist are really taking the contract seriously, you're taking your work seriously, and you're paying attention. And that goes really a long ways, because the other, the flip side of that is that oftentimes we'll get artists that are so in a hurry to just sign the contracts. They just want to, and then we get moving through, the process of developing their work. And sometimes these contracts can take, a year to 3 years to complete, and we'll hit a different kind of, bend in the road, and the artist has just no idea like what's going on, or that this is part of the milestone or part of the deliverables, or that this was in the payment schedule, or what have you. And so if anything, asking questions makes you look better rather than worse. So I would come at it from that 100%.
Okay, someone is asking, does this apply to graphic designers? As a graphic designer and artist, I've always been given pre-made contracts by companies. How do I ask them to do the artist contract? How does that work?
Well, the artist contract, so on our website, we have a sales agreement if you're selling your artwork. We do have a pretty simple commission agreement. We also have a cease and desist letter. We will have the consignment agreement. So we have a few contracts available, but I know graphic designers and illustrators in particular, they're more like the professional side of the the art business, and I think often have, are presented with contracts and are more literate about how to use them. So so I don't know if any of those agreements would apply to you, but if you're being presented with a contract, that's a great starting point to work from. And the artist contract, the project in whole is thinking if artists aren't being presented with contracts and they ask for them, at least we're providing something that they can bring to the table. Like say, you don't have a sales agreement. Well, I do. Would you please look it over? So if you have somebody presenting a contract, I would go with that and negotiate the terms that you need.
I also think that if this question may also be asking about how would one suggest they use your contract instead of theirs. And if that's also part of this dialogue, I have been in several positions where I am definitely the smaller person in the room to a much, much larger person who's trying to contract me. And the way that I have been able to kind of find a way of advocating for my contract to be used versus theirs, or to try and at least set a tone with a contract that I think starts from a place that is empowering towards artists, is, when you get to that point and everyone's going, yep, this is great. And this may not be as much applicable in public art because there's so many rules with agencies, but I just sometimes go, how about I just share? I just have one. Can I just share it? Because then we can start the conversation there. Totally. And, like, or I'll just shoot it over and be like, hey, just to get the ball rolling, here's an idea of some terms or some things like that. And I think sometimes it's just by being first, you can kind of get in there. So if you feel like that's coming, if you feel like you're at that contract stage, just being helpful. Here's some example. Here's this, has worked for me in the past.
Yeah, and I should mention all of our contracts are free, all of our templates. So if you want to go on, and the way that we've kind of bypassed the intimidation factor is that you generate a contract by just answering a questionnaire, and then it populates a contract and spits it out for you based on the terms that you've said in your questionnaire. And then that document can be edited. So you can like put in, you know, Mr. Jones is buying my painting, you know, for $1,000. You know, you can just make stuff up and test it out and generate a contract and just see what it looks like, what the terms are, and just have that in your file to refer to. Certainly if you sell artwork, you know, pretty soon we'll have the commissioning or the consignment agreement. The commission agreement we have is fairly, it's not super complicated, but you know, maybe that would be useful to look at also. But I think, you know, again, that practice, that becoming literate with just different contracts in different situations is a big part of getting over the hurdle of intimidation for when you approach something like a public art project contract, which may be more complex than you're used to.
I also just put the link to your website, artist contract in the chat for everyone to go to. Okay, what is a common warranty period to commit to in a public art contract? They have had experience with 1 to 2 years commitment.
That sounds about right to me. I'd say, I think for the county, it's generally a year, but it really just depends on the project.
Mhm.
I agree. I think more than 2 years is asking for a little bit much. I've seen 5 before. I think that's kind of excessive.
And do you have recs for insurance companies for public art? They've previously used other companies such as ECT, but I guess they won't insure over a certain amount of annual sales. Would you guys have any recommendations? Or where could they find some?
Well, just speaking from the county's perspective on that, we, when we're contracting with artists, we're happy to share a resource list of insurance providers, but we're very careful not to recommend anyone. We're not allowed as a government entity to recommend vendors, but we can certainly provide a list. So we could, Emily, we can talk about that later, maybe.
Yeah.
Together.
Absolutely. I am not a county person, so I can probably speak a little more openly and say, you know, I think there are some languages that go into insurance too, that oftentimes commissioning agencies put about needs to have a rating of, and they're speaking about the insurance company needs to have a quality rating. You can search what insurance providers in your area have that. First of all, the Hartford that you mentioned, I have had success with before in the past, but what I will say is the landscape of insurance in California is rapidly changing and difficult right now. So it is particularly hard to have recommendations at this current moment because a lot of insurances are being canceled, moved out of. It's a statewide issue. So I can absolutely empathize that there might be some difficulty finding insurance, even more so than normal right now. And I think what I would add to that is just, I think everyone is experiencing that in many ways, maybe not government agencies, but sharing those things can like, hey, this is just harder than normal right now. It's costing more than normal right now. Being really transparent about what you're seeing can also really kind of open up doors because it is more expensive than it ever has been at this moment.
Okay, someone has seen this wording in call for qualifications. All insurance liabilities and workers' comp must be met by the artist. They want to apply to the call, but they have no idea how to start and fulfill this requirement.
Yeah, I think, you know, if we're talking about at the point of when a call goes out, if they're saying at that point, they're letting you know if you're commissioned that you'll have to provide insurance. A lot of agencies, including the county, usually include the standard terms and conditions that include what that insurance would be with the call, so that you can go look and see, one, do I have it? And if I don't, how do I get it? I do think it's smart to check that, to decide if you feel like you can apply to the opportunity or not. So you wouldn't, maybe get the opportunity and then be facing it. They should be able to provide that information. If they don't, you can also, if there's an open question time with a call, you could ask, what are those limits that you're going to expect me to provide? Then you could also ask how, for resource lists at that point too. Workers' compensation is really, something that may, or when they say met by the artist, typically what that means is if it applies to you, and workers' compensation may or may not apply to you. If you are a sole prop on your own, it's just you, it doesn't apply to you. And therefore, even if it says met by the artist, by the fact that you're exempt, you're meeting that requirement. If you have lots of staff and you are required to have workers' comp, you probably would already know that. So I think the workers' comp piece, I would worry less about as an individual artist, but I would try to find out what those insurance terms are at the point of call, to be able to see if you feel like it's something you would want to take on.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I think that's a great idea, Emily. That's really smart, because the county and most agencies always, when they release a call, there's always a contract template included, so you could get that information in advance. And, if you really want to be prepared about it, which I think is an excellent idea, you could contact a few different providers with that language. And it's pretty standard language that if you just copied and pasted it into an email, they would know exactly like what you need. You don't have to try to interpret and translate it. You could literally just copy and paste it into communications with some insurance brokers, and they'll be able to give you a quote based on that.
Okay. If the condition of an artwork deteriorates.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just have one more thought on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because insurance, I think sometimes to artists it seems like this extra, barrier, and it can be, but it is ultimately meant to protect you. So look at it that way. And number two, if you are, competing for a large commission, and say you get the commission, keep in mind that within that project commission, you can deduct what you would spend on insurance. So you don't have to pay for it on your own. That could come out of your project budget as a line item as insurance, or out of the kind of administrative budget portion of the total project budget. So do keep that in mind. Even if you come across some quotes where you're like, oh, this is going to be like $1,000 just for the year, that could be deducted from the project budget. Anyway, go on.
Thank you. If a condition of an artwork deteriorates due to lack of maintenance, how can the artist prove they were not at fault? How should the contract stipulate maintenance procedures? They're a bronze sculptor and they're just worried about this.
Yeah. So if you're feeling super distrustful of the agency, that's a flag to note, whether or not this is a good fit to begin with. And I say that with the full understanding that, as Virginia, I think, laid out well, that depending on where you are, you may be willing to accept some things in some points in your career that you might not in others, because opportunities are scarce. That slide about the growth in the US is real and somewhat depressing. So I think there is, it's certainly not going to always be the ideal. But I do think it's important, if you're worried about that at the outset, to listen to that piece. My best advice with the maintenance part is to just have clearly in writing a schedule of maintenance that the commissioning agency will engage in, that you review, that you approve, that you sign off on. Like the county has a whole department of conservators that support and look at that work. A lot of agencies do. So it should not be a nebulous idea of maintaining. There should be really clear, like once a year, it receives this treatment. Once every 5 years, it receives this treatment. And then there should be also terms about what happens if something catastrophic, like a break, somebody runs into it with a car, something like that, happens. There should be some terms about, sometimes I've seen it where artists have to be contacted and given first right to kind of propose someone to fix it. And if they don't, then the agency who owns the piece can then fix it how they choose based on, the artist's first right of refusal in terms of maintenance. There's a lot of things about it, but it should not be something that's really kind of like unclear about what they're supposed to do.
I just to put this in other terms, one of the terms of the fair contract, the sales agreement we have is if the artwork that you sell becomes damaged, you can put in how it will be repaired. And if you have an hourly rate, if you, the artist, are the one who has to go and repair it. So that's an option. It just starts to get you to think about, what could happen. I was at a gallery recently that shows mostly textile and like difficult work to care for, and their contracts, they were like, yeah, no sunlight, no dust, they just like thinking ahead of all of the potential things that could be difficult for an artwork, either a public art piece or something that's going to somebody's home. And just you as the artist will probably know what's required, and just spelling that out and creating an action plan or a maintenance proposal to include is a great idea.
Okay. Could you please speak to the nuances of a public art contract when the artist is contracted with an agency or consultant and the city contract is with the agency?
Yes.
Well, Emily. I will just say, with PAiD is a great example of this, because it's a program that's, created by the county. And then we then contracted Dyson and Womack, who've been just such a wonderful team to manage and deliver many aspects of it. And then Dyson and Womack in turn has separate contracts with artists, so that they get paid for the commissions that they're doing and the work that they're doing. And so, I don't have one of these contracts in front of me to like go through it, but essentially truthfully, there can be some gray areas to it, because our contract is very detailed and specific about, the work being carried out by Dyson and Womack. But in terms of how they do some of that work, that's, it's
Yeah.
within their charge to
Yep.
do it and perform it in the way that they would like. However, we do have provisions. We have an outlined contract that we want to see Dyson and Womack provide the artists that they are going to work with. So that we as the county can see that certain kind of, agreements and terms are being upheld. And so that's part of what they have to turn over to us, is that they gave that contract to the artists and that it's in the agreement. But Emily, please add.
Yeah. No, and I think that's why I said I kind of focused on the relationship between the artists when they're being commissioned directly with the project owner, because it is a little bit cleaner. And I totally agree with Brianna that there is some gray area when you're being, and I have seen artists be contracted to general contractors. I have seen artists being contracted to architects on projects. I have seen artists be contracted to public art consultants. Some rules of thumb exist across all of these, similar to with the agency, which is terms are negotiable. If you don't feel good about the relationship, that's a good warning. You know, a lot of those same things exist, a lot of the same recommendations around copyright, etc. But what the differences are, what Brianna was saying about pass down. So what she was saying about there's some terms that the county has implemented that we then need to pass down to you. That happens a lot in these scenarios, but also other things can get passed down. I have seen really bloated contracts, particularly if an artist is being contracted with a general contractor, where that's where sometimes that bond business gets brought into play and other things that are so much more appropriate to a large construction company than an artist. But because they're treating you like a sub, they have rules that they have to pass down that really have no business being in an artist contract. So I think that pass down piece, if it's with a public art consultant, it's not as usually as because everyone's focused on the art there. But if you're getting subbed to an architect or a GC or somebody like that, those pass down things can really bring in a lot of stuff that is overburdensome and not useful and problematic in some cases. So another thing I would advocate for is ask to see the prime contract. So the prime contract is the contract between the commissioning agency and the person holding all the subs. If you are a sub, you have a right to ask to see the prime contract. The prime contractor can withhold the financial parts, like how much they're being paid. They have a right to do that, but they should show you all the other terms, because sometimes you're bound as a sub to things that they're bound to. And you should have the right to ask for that, to see that, to make sure that there's nothing in there that you're being bound to that you don't know about. It definitely is a little bit of a trickier space. It can work in your benefit. It can also be really problematic. It's a very case by case thing. So I didn't go into too much detail on it, but I think advocating to see a prime contract is a really good point. Making sure you know everything that's being brought down to you is a really good point, and treating it like every other term that we talked about in this applies, copyright, etc., is another good point.
Is there ever a time when it's industry standard to give the commissioning agency copyright?
What do you think? Have you come across this, Virginia?
I don't think artists should ever give up their copyright. I mean, it has to be really, I don't know. I've never seen a situation where it's good for an artist to give up the copyright.
Same.
It's certainly not industry standard.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it should ever be asked of artists. I think where I've seen more examples of that are with graphic designers or with people working in the music industry, where they get work for hire contracts to create things for, companies, or when it's part of a larger sort of like brand. But for artwork, I don't think that is really ever the case.
Can you talk about the contracts for social practice, working with community engagement projects?
I would need more information. Like what's
Well,
being asked?
Same, a little bit. Yeah.
I know that with oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Virginia.
I was just gonna say, is it in terms of a public art project? Because I know that community engagement component can be often at times a big component of public art specifically.
Yeah. if it is in that context, then like the county, they do have some terms about what they mean and what that looks like that just are part of that contract. If you are being asked to do a community engagement as part of your scope of
I think Emily is having issues with her internet again.
See if she comes back. I'm sure she'll be back in a second.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think just kind of adding on to maybe what Emily was gonna say, you know, the community engagement portion of a civic art project is very up, you know, it's the trajectory it takes, the look, the feel, you know, it just varies so much by artist and by project, and it is part of the artist's design, like their project design. So it would really just depend, like, first what they propose as part of their total project. And then, so there's not like this, the county or civic art isn't coming in with like a set idea of like what needs to be done in the community engagement component. We have some goals around community engagement and some values around community engagement, but then it's up to the artist to design their own community engagement plan as it is gonna, you know, inform or be a part of the larger design of the project. And then from that, they would, you know, develop a budget to accompany that and certain kind of like benchmarks and things around that. And all of that is part of the scope of work that then gets put into the contract.
I agree. I think it would be specific scope. What I was trying to say before, again, apologies, the internet tonight is not in my favor, was that I would think a lot of that would be hashed out in the scope of work piece that is truly one of the most negotiable parts of like what it is you're going to do and how and all of that. And you could be really clear in there. It could also exist in your proposal if there's an accepted proposal where you've stated what you're going to do, that could then be adopted as like an attachment to the contract that is clearly stating, you know, what you've agreed to do.
and last question, if I am installing an artwork in a county building such as a library that's open to the public and I hurt myself by accident, would I not be covered by their liability insurance? Or is this what they mean by workers' comp insurance?
Yeah, so I mean, you would, that's assuming that you took out insurance as part of the contract, you know, for the commission. So it would be insurance that you would be covered by your own insurance.
Yeah. And that is not typically what is meant by workers' comp. Workers' comp is very specific and it is about employees. So if you have employees, not you, if you have hired certain number of people, then you are required to provide workers' comp, which means if one of your employees has an accident, you are then covered to, you know, pay for their time off or whatever it might be. That is, workers' comp is very different. It is liability insurance that you're kind of talking about there. And again, that piece would be something you would have provided to cover yourself, just like the county provides to cover themselves and vice versa.
We got one more question about insurance. Could you speak a little about industry standards for the insurance part of contracts?
Standards.
Yeah.
I think we're all sighing because it's one area that maybe doesn't have as much standards. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I have zero experience. I've heard from other people that they're like, insurance is the big headache. That's all I have to offer.
Yeah, we usually have like a minimum coverage of $1 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but it actually is kind of standard. For larger scale projects, and I don't know this off the top of my head, to be honest, like the scale, but for larger projects, it's $2 million. Those are kind of standard, like minimum requirements that we ask that all artists get. That's again, speaking of limited liability insurance, if the project requires you to actually drive to the work site, the county also requires that you show proof of auto insurance. But that's only if you're like physically going to the sites. If you're working from home or the project doesn't require you to travel, then we don't ask for that. But those are two kind of big things that we always kind of encounter. But I don't know, Emily, Allie, is there any other things that you come across just in the contracts you've had with the county?
No, but I did have a question and you were kind of talking on it. Like what are the types of insurance that are kind of standardly required? I think I've gotten that question from a lot of artists.
Yeah, that I know of, just limited liability insurance, which just covers a lot. If something goes wrong, if your projects, something goes wrong, it's and then auto insurance. But most don't really ask artists to show even proof of workers' comp. But yeah, those are the two that appear in our contracts over and over again.
I agree. I think 1 and 2 million is fairly standard. I have seen requests for 4 or 5. I think that gets a little bit sometimes beyond even the capacity of what some folks might be able to offer. Limited liability or general liability, GL, that's another word that often is used in that area for that general basic liability with 1 million or 2 million coverages. It's fairly standard. Again, $1 million is typically standard in your industry or for your auto. Other insurances you might get asked about is professional liability. That sometimes comes into play if you're providing engineering or other kind of drafting architectural services, where there is a profession that has professionalized standards around it that sometimes people want. There's also sometimes things called E&O, errors and omissions. I've seen that show up in some contracts before. None of that, what I think, is wildly out of control. But when you get requests for things like umbrella coverages for millions and millions on top of, I think that it may be not that it's erroneous or anybody's intention to be erroneous, but they may be thinking of it. That signals to me they're thinking of it more like a contractor, like a builder, who carries a lot higher insurance. And usually it's just a bit of education about what an artist is, what they do, what the real risk is. It can also be a signal that they are nervous about hiring an artist and see that as really risky. I've come across that a lot with agencies and so there's some work that can be done on an advocacy way to like demystify that it's not actually really risky to commission artists, that they actually are some of the least risk. I have seen, they work really hard and they do the standard of care and work that is received is often far superior. So I think there's an advocacy piece there too about educating it, sometimes smaller agencies, people that don't commission as often, about what the real risk is when they're commissioning artists and what it isn't.
Mm-hmm. And regarding insurance, what constitutes a larger project? Over 100,000 for the commission amount, or?
Yeah, I mean, again, that just varies so much by agency. So the county does typically quite large scale projects. But if you look at smaller municipalities with just a smaller, territory and budget, they might regularly do like projects that are 50,000, and that's like huge for them. For the county of Los Angeles, I'd say like our average budget size is maybe 300 to 500,000. So 100 is not huge, but it's significant. And then, we've talked about this in previous sessions, that the budget size of 100,000, again, if you're new to the field, it might sound like a lot. It's not a lot, only because just the materials involved in constructing a permanent public art project it really gets costly hiring, the subcontractors for the materials alone. It just adds up. So that's where our budgets tend to be kind of bucketed at higher amounts. But we also commonly have projects, that are $1 million commissions too. It just really depends.
I agree. Okay, we are at the end of our questions, I think, Allie.
Yep.
Awesome.
Could I add one thought or one bit of information? I know there was somebody who was I think jokingly, but not so jokingly, like, help, are we all supposed to like have somebody, an artist, legal lawyer, at our fingertips to ask all these questions and to have us help us along with all these things. And I know that especially for artists, a lot of this can feel overwhelming. One of the things that I did for this workshop, but it has been in other conversations as well, is started to work with one of our attorney advisors for our project to start to create a directory of resources that will help artists on a lot of different legal topics. So the directory is on the artist contract website. There's a button for resources, and it's the first thing that comes up. And I will add a way for people to recommend a resource that be added to the list. It should be a living document, but it provides a lot of resources for artists to turn to, because I know a lot of these things can feel overwhelming and confusing. And so having ideas of where to ask or to hire an attorney if you need to, that hopefully that document will continue to grow, but it is there available for everybody to access.
Thank you so much, Virginia. I think that is an absolutely beautiful place to end this conversation on, an existing resource that an artist out of their own experiences and needs has taken the time to provide, because yeah, the ideal, jokingly or not, would be that when you're negotiating, you have a lawyer by your side. The agencies do, and that's a level of thinking about equity and parity, even in a small degree. But it is for many reasons that we've talked about, daunting, et cetera, just to even find someone. So I think that resource, if we can leverage it and others to kind of open up dialogue, be more transparent, find resources among this community, starting with conversations like this and the work that Virginia and the artist contracts have been doing, it really does start to build momentum and change. And I think the last piece I would say is that a lot of what we focused on is what the artists can do. This is a lot of work that agencies can do. And I just want to say that part of this PAiD program is the agency taking responsibility for doing their work in this instance, holding these conversations, but also in some of the work we're doing with the Artist Council around looking at ways we can better support artists and actually do some of those ideal things. So it's amazing to see agencies taking the agency to hold themselves accountable and responsible. And so I just want to commend and highlight that when that does happen, that is a big part of this too. So that rounds out our contracts conversation. As I say every time, this is an iterative process. We are learning as we roll these out. This is the third one. If you have suggestions about how we can do a better job, about how we can answer questions better, about how we can present better, about what topics we maybe aren't covering that you'd like to see, here is our email. Please email us. Please let us know ways that we can do our work better to support artists. We definitely want to hear your ideas. We have some upcoming workshops, as Ali previewed for us at the top of the night. We hope to see some of you back at these future ones. And thank you again to Virginia for your time, your care, your work, and your presentation. And thank you again to Brianna for joining us in this conversation and giving some of that really critical, perspective of the county on these items that I know so many artists are really excited to learn about. And thank you, Ali, for being the amazing navigator of the conversation for us. It is critical support and help, and I really value and appreciate your time in working on these evenings as well. And thanks for bearing with my internet issues tonight.
Wasn't too bad.
That's it. Thank you.
Emily. Thank you, Ally.
you.
Yeah, this is so wonderful. We love hearing what you're doing, Virginia, too, and following it. So everyone should hop on to their website and check out their resources because they're doing incredible things.
Thank you.